If you happen to be someone who loves repeating yourself, well, then skip this episode. This one is not for you. But if you want to be understood correctly more often the first time, then please keep listening because my guest today coaches clients on clear communications, among many other things, and is going to have some good ideas for us. I'm Carl White, principal at Market Advisory Group, which is a healthcare marketing agency, and I'm also the host of Practice Care. The mission for both is the same, and that's to help private practice owners stay private. Not only is that what they want, but care is better when the provider owns the practice because that's when they're going to have the most freedom to make the clinical decisions that they think is best for their patients. Unlike when somebody else owns them, often the agenda of the owner creeps in and nobody ever gets harmed, but it's not what the clinician wants to have to deal with, and compromises can get made. So let's just get rid of all the other owners and keep private practice owners private. My guest today is Amanda HarNess. Amanda is the founder and CEO of Business Excelerated. As a business consultant and coach, she focuses on working with leaders and owners to develop high-performing organizations that grow faster and easier. She works with small and mid-sized practices who are actively seeking solutions to break through their roadblocks, optimize their people, enhance leadership, and accomplish their goals. And Amanda, thanks for coming on Practice Care.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Carl.
Yeah, this is such a great topic, and it's funny. On the surface, it sounds like, oh, just talk clearly, use better words. I don't know what you're going to educate all of us on the myriad of ways in which we think we're clear, but we're actually not. But before we get there, start with where I start with every guest. Your bio is short on purpose that I just read, so fill in the gaps. Tell us a bit more about you. I'm curious, very curious, how you got into leadership coaching, maybe with an emphasis on communications, maybe not, but that's part of it. So help, introduce yourself.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So I think one of the most fun things to help people understand is that I actually used to be an occupational therapist. So I really understand the healthcare world really well from an insider's perspective. So I did that for a little over a decade. I'm from California originally. I now live in Colorado, and I worked in all different kinds of practices, all different areas of healthcare as an OT. And I wouldn't trade it for the world. It was an amazing life experience. And I use so much of my education and experience as an OT in the work I do now. But I did make a shift, obviously. We're talking about this today. So around, just over 10 years in, around 11 or 12 years, I decided that I wanted to make a shift. I admittedly had a little bit of burnout myself. Also, my 17-year-old self picked my career, and then my, 30-something self was like, maybe we want to do something different.
All right.
So I started to consider what else I would want to do. Well, in the 12 years that I was an OT, I was also on different boards, on different committees, and in different leadership and director level positions in the facilities I worked, focused on different change initiatives, which is what I'm doing now. So I help them with communication strategies, growth, execution, implementation, leadership development, all kinds of things like that. And so I took the 12 years of experience doing that, recognized that it's really in my zone of genius. I love doing it. And I really had a passion for healthcare still. So how could I pair the two in a different way? So I wasn't necessarily providing direct patient care. And that's when I've opened Business Accelerated. I still have a good influence on helping healthcare, in helping the people inside a business and the people who receive the care, but just in a different way. And so that's how I landed in leadership development. I act sometimes as a consultant and sometimes as a coach, depending on what we're addressing. But that's kind of what led me here today, is seeing a need in an area that I wanted to continue to influence and have passion for.
Yeah, and I have a special amount of respect for OTs, PTs, speech therapists, anybody I don't exactly know how to categorize it, but you're working hands-on. It's progress is, I'll say, chunky, and teaching is another one. It just takes an amount of, I'm not sure what, but I know I don't have it. So I have a lot of tons of respect for anybody in those professions and what they do. So for clear communication, we all think we, when we say something, we get it, we know what we mean. And we marvel at those who at anybody who just doesn't understand it right the first time, right? I mean, this is the obvious thing, right?
Yeah. There's actually a lot of statistics around the impact of communication in organizations. One of them being that ineffective communication or miscommunication is responsible for 70% of the errors in a business. 70%, just communication.
Yeah.
And I just find that so fascinating. Part of my education, being that I come from a healthcare background, does lie in effective communication, human behavior, and psychology. And I'm able to leverage that to impact this area that obviously has a great influence on business success. And really what I've broken it down to is there's tactical communication and relational communication. And so those are the two areas that I tend to focus when, there are leaders or owners who are like, I don't understand why they don't get it. Or I think I'm being very clear what the heck is happening. Is we try to address it from both sides to see what we can do about making that better.
Is there ever an aha when they're saying that? I don't understand why nobody gets me. Does anyone ever say, maybe it's me? Or as I'm saying that out loud, I now see why that's so painful?
Yeah, the businesses I work with, the leaders are actively seeking a solution, right? So they are willing to at least consider the idea that maybe it's them too, right? And I won't say that it's always leaders, but the neck of the bottle's at the top, and what's one of the sayings? Pardon the language, but shit rolls downhill, So if there's problems at the top, it trickles down.
Yes.
So the approach I take is what I've coined the leadership first approach. It's working with the leaders and owners of organizations because of all the beneficial trickle down effects, because what's happening at the top will be seen everywhere else. So I always take a leadership first approach, which means that the people I work with have to at least be open to considering that maybe there's something they need to work on too.
Which probably just massively increases the buy-in from everybody down the hill, right? Because they're just not pointing the finger at us. They're
right.
They're eating some of their own cooking or whatever the right saying is.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's always both sides.
Yeah. So there's relational communications. I've not heard that term before. And tactical communications. I'd love to hear some examples. Even like the before and after, So, and part of it is we can go, oh my God, but also hoping maybe some listeners will hear some of your examples and go, man, that might sound like me, and thus we're helping somebody. Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully. So I'll kind of explain the difference in a really shorthand version. So the tactical communication is what's being communicated to who, when, and through what method, right? So is it an email? Is it an instant message? Is it a phone call? So it's that tactical side. And usually the problems that I see as examples are there are too many ways to communicate. And that makes things ineffective because you either have confusion or miscommunication or a misunderstanding. So an example would be if you're communicating mostly in written form via email or an instant message in some way, someone doesn't have your tone of voice or your body language, anything like that to really understand exactly how you mean what you said. So there are ways to effectively communicate in a written form, but we have to take into account the word choice we're using when we're writing to make sure that we are in fact being clear, because most of the misunderstandings occur when someone hears a tone of voice that's different from our intention. And then they think that, they'll take it in some way, it'll trigger something in them. That's an example of how it's both sides, right? The person who wrote the communication maybe could have chose different words. The person who received the communication maybe shouldn't have taken it personally if it wasn't meant to be. And then you have a clash, right? So usually what we're looking at is what forms of communication are being used and creating more guidelines around it. So when should it be an email versus a phone call? When should it be a post-it note versus a quick hallway interaction? And so we're really creating guidelines around what type of communication should be through what method. And then looking at the timing of communications, who should receive it, maybe who shouldn't, and things like that. So we're kind of breaking it down, creating guidelines, which essentially sets expectations and a little bit more clarity. And then the relational. So really when I'm describing that, it's the person-to-person communication.
So in person.
How we're relating. How we're relating. So it's more like how you say what you say. So a little bit more on the word choice, but with more specificity, and bringing into awareness the way that someone might receive what we say. So the overall crux of relational communication is perspective. And
Okay.
it's the gap between what you said and what someone thinks you meant. Exactly what we're really talking about here is
Right.
the way that I say something, and the way someone receives it and then responds to it is all based on their perception.
Mm-hmm.
And so the underlying thing to keep in mind there is that our perceptions are developed over time, and they're based on our thoughts, our knowledge, our opinions, all from our past experiences. And we all come from different places, have our own perceptions. And that's what creates those times where a leader is like, what, like, how do they not get it? Like, I think I've been pretty freaking clear and somehow they still don't understand. And that's that game of telephone effect that comes from
Yeah.
perspective. So that's one of the things that often we start with some of the tactical stuff, because we can create some quick wins around setting some guidelines and a little more clarity around the tactical side. And then we spend more time going through the actual cause of dysfunction when it comes to the relational communication,
Mm-hmm.
so that then we can really be resolving for real things and not creating band-aids, and then there's solutions that stick over time when it comes to that person to person.
Yeah. I wonder, do you have maybe a more common example of like a tactical, bad communication that when you start to work with a client, maybe something more common that you maybe on the relational side too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So from the tactical side, I was working with an organization. They're in the mental health field, and they were using both a Slack channel, that's an online
Yep.
platform that you can use for instant messaging. They were also using a texting platform. They were doing emails, and then they are half remote, half in person. So
Oh my
what
God,
we were
already my
finding,
head hurts. Like,
yeah,
because it's really like, okay, keep going.
yes, yeah. So there were a few things we looked at. One of the first things is that the texting platform they were using, I understood the reason they were trying to use it is you could create different channels, have different groups. That way, only people who were involved could, listen to what was being said or whatever. But the texting platform was actually not HIPAA compliant, and so that was one of the first things we looked at,
Great.
was just, what are you communicating on this channel, and are we at risk for any compliance issues? So we actually just got rid of that one. And
Congratulations. It's the
yeah.
least of reasons why I can imagine, but okay. I have a follow-up. Keep going. I just have another question. Yeah.
Yeah. Then we looked at Slack, which is another instant messaging platform, and how they were using that. We chose to actually go through Teams, which there are some more HIPAA compliances that come along with the Microsoft platform.
Mm-hmm.
And so we looked at the texting platform in Slack and basically decided that we could shift over to something that was a little more compliant, while still considering what information they were sharing.
Mm-hmm.
And then we were looking at what information was being shared to who, because if you're half remote and half in person, what they were really noticing is that people were uninformed, right? Well, they had a hallway conversation with this person, but it didn't get relayed to the partner of their department who's remote. So we really had to think about what their meeting cadence was and try to save certain information for those meetings when everyone needed to hear the same information at the same time.
Okay.
Those are the first two tactical things that we looked at, is what platforms were they using? How could we minimize them and make them compliant and things like that? And then also looked at how they could better use their time when they were all together in the same room. A room could be even a Zoom room, right?
Sure.
And so how are they saving certain communications for when everyone can be listening to the same thing at the same time, so that there weren't people being left out accidentally? So those are two of the first tactical things that we looked at.
Did you run into a company I used to work for? We probably over invited people to meetings, and part of it was because we weren't sure if person X needed to be included, and the other part of it was person X felt that they should be included and could sort of get the word out, and then person X has to be included. So I'm wondering, with this particular example, were there too many people involved? Like, do you get to the point where you say, look, if it's the must-haves are these people, or do you figure that out in a way where the people who should be involved are and not others, and it's all okay?
Yeah. Meetings are a form of communication, really. There are purposes to the meetings where it's like for bringing up problems, solving those problems, and deciding who's going to do what when, right? So there's the action-oriented side of a meeting, but it's still a method of communication.
Mm-hmm.
And so I always recommend knowing the purpose of a meeting and having some form of an agenda, right? We don't necessarily need an agenda where every single bullet point is listed out and you have it for people beforehand and all that stuff. But if you know the purpose behind a meeting, then you can just have like 3 bullet points. Like, the meetings that we have every Tuesday at 3 p.m. are for pinpointing issues, coming to a plan for resolution, and then deciding who does what and when. It's just 3 bullet points, but it's the purpose and the agenda. And as long as you went through all 3 things, mission accomplished, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you have that information, then you should know who should be involved. You won't necessarily run into people who don't need to be there, because you know ahead of time what the purpose is for the meeting and the outcomes you want. So then that makes it less likely that you have people who don't need to be there. And if there are individuals who feel like they should be included, I would just question it and just make sure, okay, we're all about collaboration. Can you help me understand why it is that you want to be involved? And as long as it makes sense, why not? If they want to spend their time and you can align with the value that they think is needed for them to be there, then okay. If there needs to be
Remarkably
pushback,
rational.
then that's a whole other story. But
Yeah.
that's the
Remarkably
tactical
rational.
side, right? It's
Yeah.
pretty rational.
Yeah. We try. Yeah. Well, we failed at that already. So that's the tactical side. So then same question on the relational side, like a commonplace good example to help us kind of wrap our heads around it.
Yeah. I think feedback is like constructive feedback is one of the things that really shouldn't be given only in written form. And that is one that I often see cause some issues, because feedback is essentially at risk of being taken as, here's what you're doing wrong, here's what I need you to do different. And no one's going to receive people poking at stuff very well. Naturally. Again, we're talking about psychology and human behavior a lot when we're talking about communication. And if I get a note from someone that just feels like they're poking at all the things I do wrong, I'm not going to feel very good about it. And so if we're asking people to be able to be open to constructive feedback and then have the courage to then go improve and do something about it, we should make sure they receive it in the way that we want them to. So I always recommend different kinds of feedback, especially constructive, be given in person. Even successful feedback. If you're trying to acknowledge someone for something that went well, it just carries so much more value and weight in person too. And when I say in person, I do mean just face to face. So it could literally be in person or via a Zoom call, but face to face is more. So that would be an area where if you're writing something, your tone of voice matters a lot, and so does your body language and things like that. So I would say feedback is definitely an area where you want to give that face to face, make sure it's received the way you want it to. That there's open time for back and forth, right? If there's questions and follow-ups that need to happen. And if you're looking for feedback, ask for it in person too, because people really are going to resist the idea that they're writing something constructive to maybe their boss and that it's being kept in black and white, So there's a political worry that comes with that. And so I would say
now it's written, it's in your record, it's there. Right. Yeah. So, I mean, like, where do we all go wrong? Is it just we do the opposite of the sorts of things that you were describing, or where, because it's as applicable in personal life too, right? In family relations and how you talk to spouse or kids, anybody. Where do we all go wrong? It's just we're sort of born this way, or what?
Well, I would say there's 2 things that come to mind. Part of it is, yes, we're born this way. And what I mean by that is, our primitive brain will always make us the most important thing because it's a survival tactic. If I'm not thinking about me and my next moment, there could be a lion behind me, right? Like that's always going to be there. So you're always going to think of yourself first, and we just need to recognize that it's fine, right? But the thing that we're missing is the second step of that needs to be, okay, I thought of how it affects me first, and what else do I need to consider? So it's really asking more questions. If someone said something and I was triggered, I need to ask questions and be curious about why was I triggered, so that I have a better understanding as to whether or not it makes sense for me to feel upset, frustrated, angry, whatever. If it doesn't make sense because really it's a me problem, then that conversation looks different. If I reflect and I'm like, you know what, actually, it really is a problem. I was maybe the words that they used were really inappropriate for anyone. So I want to make sure that they're not using those words to any other person, then we should have a conversation, right? So
Yeah.
it's the first thing would be recognize we're always going to think of us first, and that the mistake we make is if we don't ask the second question of, and how could it be me? How could it be different? Should I feel that way? And so, yeah, that would be the first thing that comes to mind, is being more self-aware and self-reflective and being curious. And then the second part of that, I think, would be a matter of speaking to situations instead of people directly. So if we received something in a certain way, or someone didn't understand what we wanted, or things like that, we want to be able to speak to situations instead of people. So for example, you know, if you're trying to address a communication problem with deadlines, right? You keep getting things late, and it makes it so that you can't follow up with, you know, patients on time or billing on time or whatever, right? When you're communicating to that person, instead of saying something like, you need to turn in your stuff on time because we're always running late with our billing, it could be, it's hard for us to take the second step and receive our billing on time if we don't get things, you know, that we need on time as well. So it's really about the situation, not the person. It's not a, you need to do this. It's a, we can't do, you know, Z until we get X. So we need to solve the problem in X in order to make Z happen better.
So the difference in wording you just said was very subtle, and I could just see a lot of people, and even me as a flash reaction, going, "Really? Is that really that subtle change make that much of a difference?"
Yeah.
And you, of course, are going to say, "Yes, it does," but why?
Yeah, it does, because of defensiveness. Again, we're always going to think of us first. So if someone says, you need to do blah, blah, our brains hear, you're doing a bad job. And we don't want to do a bad job. It feels bad, right? And so our reaction is going to be defensive. And then we don't hear the second half of what someone says in regard to, maybe they're just trying to help resolve an issue. Instead, we take it personally, like they're pointing a finger. So then our minds go to how we can show them what they're doing wrong back.
It's
in
so
a defensive
true.
way. It is true.
Yeah.
So that's what happens, is if you make it about them as a person, they'll get defensive, and then they stop listening, and their brain is only trying to protect them. And they're just going to think about what they need to say to defend themselves, or point something else out, or even someone else. Well, Joe doesn't do da 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 da. Why aren't you talking to him? You know, so if you make it about the situation and give them a reason and a purpose, then they are less likely to get defensive, and you have someone who's going to collaborate to resolve a problem. And it's less about the problem, it's more about the solution.
So it's not that the message itself is materially different. It's that you are crafting the sequence of the message in a way that keeps the recipient's mind open so that they can hear the core purpose of what you're trying to say.
Yeah,
you're
so they can
like
hear
going
the core
around the
purpose of what you're
defensiveness. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
You want them to hear it that way because you want it to turn out well.
Yeah.
So really, we're still working for ourselves.
Yeah.
We still are focused on us. I want them to receive this well so that we can resolve the problem. And in order for that to happen, I need to say it this way. And that's how it's always down to the leader. Because if you say it in one way and they get defensive, then it's still going to crumble. But if you choose your words wisely and they receive it the way you want them to, you're going to get the outcome you want. So it's always leadership first.
So really, I mean, as you're saying this, I'm thinking, if you say it the wrong way, which, you know, point the finger and be personal, you are fighting, I don't know, however many thousands of years of evolution have got us to this point. Is that pretty much it?
Yeah, you're solving for the wrong problem.
You're solving for the wrong problem. So you can say, oh, the feelings don't matter. Okay. But you just triggered a, you know, thousands upon thousands of years of sort of biological response. You yourself. Yep. So you're welcome to try that. You want to go up against all that, you're welcome to, or you can switch the order in the way that, Amanda, very subtle, and we're not trying to coddle anybody, we're trying to keep their mind open for the second 15 seconds of what you're saying so that X can actually get done.
That makes a lot of sense. It has nothing to do with coddling or hand holding, and everything to do with fostering the outcome you'd like.
Yeah. And if they, feel a little bad because, oh my God, look at me, I'm dropping the ball all the time. Back to this original example. Yeah, they're going to feel a little whatever, right? But at least they heard it.
Well, yeah, and that's a motivator, right? Yeah. If that's okay if they you want them to recognize that.
Yeah.
Because then if something else comes up in the future, maybe they'll be able to catch it before you have to talk to them, right? We're also developing their skills. You're not just demanding things of them. You're providing some reasoning behind things, helping them develop as a team member. There's a bunch of reasons why you would want to take the time to nuance what you want to say.
Right. So, I mean, it's sort of this macro question. What I wrote down here is what can we all do about this? Is like, where should somebody start? I have two questions I kind of ask every guest in the sort of wrap up phase. I'm going in a different order. A lot of people who are listening to this, hopefully some listeners are going to say, this might be me, this might be us. I want to do something, but I'm at the starting line and I don't know where to start. So are there one or two simple things you could say as like a push to kind of get going down the path to fixing this?
Sure. So I'm going to preface this with, there's an approach that I take called the elephant in the boardroom. And it's all about helping organizations either focus on the thing that they've been missing or finally identify the thing they've been ignoring, the elephant in their boardroom, right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes that means that I'm pointing out something that maybe feels a little uncomfortable, but it's with the purpose of pulling out an underlying cause so we get to actual solutions and not band-aids. So with that being said, what I would offer is to stop using time constraints as an excuse for ineffective communication.
Give me an example.
So that might hit a few people in a trigger spot, but really when a communication is going poorly, but you have some tools in front of you or you recognize that something needs to shift, you can't just backburn it because you feel busy and say you're going to get to it tomorrow. Or you can't say, like, if someone takes something in a way you didn't intend it, you can't say, well, I'm sorry, I was in a hurry. These are excuses.
I didn't have time to be proper. I got you.
Yes.
Okay.
You can always choose differently. Here's an example. There was one client who, if we didn't start a conversation with pleasantries, then she felt like she wasn't getting time or feeling valued or respected. And she was feeling that way about some of her team members too, who were just a little more quick and direct. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. That's just how some people are. Some people need to start a conversation with, hi, Carl, how are you? How's your summer? Da, 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 da. And then we can get to what we want.
Right.
But sometimes people aren't as good at that. There are some people who are very happy and to just kind of like, hey, Carl, I need you to give me XYZ by Friday at 5 p.m., okay? And move on. And they're not being rude. They're not trying to not give you the time. It's just a different way of communicating.
Right.
So what we ended up doing is, for the direct communicators, if they were in a situation where they could allow a little more time for a couple pleasantries, hi, hellos, then they did. And so they needed to take a minute to recognize. But if they were in a, like, I'll call it a hallway passing, right, where I just need to let them know some information because I'm jetting out of here, they needed to say, like, hey, I don't mean to be a little, I'm gonna need, hey, I need to be a little bit short because I'm out on my way to a meeting, but can you get me XYZ by 5 p.m. on Friday? I'll circle back with you a little later so we can catch up. And they move on. So they're just calling it out and saying, I don't have time, but I'm not trying to be an a-hole. Here's what I need. I'll come back to you later. And they go. So you can communicate in a way when time is a constraint that doesn't cause issues.
Yes.
So just think on that. You do have time for something to make it better. So that would be my first thing, is don't use that as an excuse.
Don't use time as an excuse. Okay. I thought you were going to say something like, the deadline's in 2 hours, just get it to me, and I guess you did. You gave a better example of that where, yeah, if you don't have it, okay, understood that. The other question that I ask, which I'm reversing the order on, is anything that you think we should have covered that I just didn't ask you about in the context of what we're talking about, just in the interest of a completeness.
Yeah. This is a little bit of a deeper conversation, and there's a lot of content that I have out there on this topic.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that makes communication hard most of the time is the discomfort with any confrontation or conflict. So,
oh my God, that's a whole other topic, but yeah.
yeah. If communication is going well, there probably isn't a lot of confrontation and conflict, but sometimes, like when we miscommunicate or misunderstand or get frustrated or have resentment, that's confrontation and conflict. And that's really uncomfortable for a lot of people. It's not usually done really well. And there are a lot of tools and resources to help people grow the skill in that area and then become more confident with it. So that would be another thing that I would attend to when it comes to trying to create more effective communication, is that it requires some enhancement in people's ability to have constructive confrontation or conflict. And that is a form of communication, is you've got to communicate well under those circumstances. So
yeah,
that would be the thing that I would want people to kind of think about more, dive into. Like I said, I've got a lot of things out there, but that would be the other part to kind of put onto this.
And I'm curious, is there like a tactical part of that and then a relational part of that? Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So to kind of make it short and sweet. So for example, there are 6 steps that I recommend for someone to use when you're having a confrontational conversation. There's more detail to them, but essentially it's step 1, you're trying to stay calm and meet in private. Step 2, you want to be able to listen to what they have to say, because there's always a second side of things. Step 3 is giving them your perspective so they know what's going on. Then we want to make sure that they understand any kind of consequences of something that happened. You want to help them understand what you expect of them and how you're going to support them going forward. And then you move on. Don't hold it against them. If they don't have a repeat, let them show you they can do better. Right. So there's that's kind of a tactical thing, because you're not walking up to someone in the middle of a hallway and calling them on stuff in front of other people. Right. So
that still happens, huh?
And then,
it's just the blind spot.
Yeah.
My God, it's massive. Jeez.
We get hot and fired and we just react. Essentially, the 6 steps are all about responding instead of reacting. And then the relational side to that, there are a couple of tools and resources that can help you frame the conversation so that there's a few of the things we touched on today, like choosing how you say what you say, helping direct the conversation so the person is open-minded and not defensive, setting clear expectations. It does require nuances in the relational communication so that you don't have that gap between what you said and what they think you meant. So yeah, there would definitely be a tactical and relational side of that too.
Interesting.
But it's because we're all humans. The world of healthcare is for humans, and we are humans working in it, and we have to remember that. And so there's always going to be a relational side to everything, because people.
Yes. Easy, but for the people, right? Those damn people keep getting in the way. Well, thank you, Amanda, so much for coming on. I say this to a number of guests, and it's totally true here. We could have probably 10 episodes and just keep introducing new topics and going deeper, and I'm sure they all weave. So thank you for taking some time and giving us some insights. Really appreciate it. So you gave us a bunch of contact information that we will get into the show notes for your episode. So anybody who wants to contact Amanda, find out more, or connect with her, that's one of many good places where you can go. A couple of points before we wrap up. First, if you're someone like Amanda or I who seeks to serve private practice owners, or if you're a private practice owner yourself, either way, if you have some experience on the business side of private practice that you think others would benefit from hearing, we want you to come on Practice Care and tell the world about it. In the show notes for Amanda's episode and every episode is a link, a couple of questions. Tell us what's on your mind so that we can get you scheduled as soon as you can. And finally, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to Practice Care. We do a new episode every week. We're on Apple, Spotify, Google, every other major platform, YouTube. Easy to find. Subscribe so that you can stay up to date with every new episode. Thanks very much, and until next time.